what I want to do today is cover anti-American protests in Mexico. And I found this video kind of entertaining because I drew some parallels in between the anti-immigrant sentiments there as well as in the US, and also just more broadly global. Because if you've been keeping up with any news, there have been a lot of anti-immigrant protests in like the EU, in the UK, in Poland, a lot of different places where they have been basically bringing in large, not even illegal, in the EU, some of the EU cases, but large swaths of people who are not assimilated with the culture, right? In the EU case, it's essentially Middle Easterners, right? So they're bringing them in. And I think that there is something to be said about, different cultures and trying to bring in groups of people who are not acclimated, and there being huge culture clashes with the established group of people who are already there and those who are coming in. And so I'll just leave it at that, high level, and then I'll get into it a little bit more as I go through the video. But I think, and hopefully I think, you'll come to agree with me, but I think that there are some very stark comparisons that can be drawn, and some in this instance, right, because there's kind of a different, it's not really, there is some culture clash, but it's more having to do with affordability and accessibility is kind of what these protests are focused around. But I think there are some parallels that can be made to the US market, and I think that we can call for fixes in both situations. So without further ado, I'll get into it here, and then we can talk about it more as the video unfolds.
Gringo, go f***ing home. Pero yo no.
All right, that is a strong start. And the funniest thing about that is she looks kind of like a gringo. She is not looking, and obviously so, I think she falls into that category, but not me, no. So kind of hilarious to me that this is her opening statement, but like, you're part of the problem.
The locals in Mexico City have began attacking American-owned businesses, blaming foreign residents and remote workers for the rising cost of living.
La gente está muy molesta.
And they do have a point, which they'll get into further, but it's funny to me that there are, anti-immigrant protests in Mexico, whereas in the U.S., I don't think there's been publicization of anti-immigrant protests. I feel like there are obviously anti-immigrant sentiments, illegal immigrants, right? So that's one difference, right? These are legal immigrants coming into Mexico versus illegal immigrants into the U.S. But again, there's sentiments on both sides, and it's just funny to see the script flipped going down into Mexico, and they don't want Americans. So just kind of entertaining to me to see this, and it was and rightfully so, though. I understand, right? Because what they're focusing on here is the U.S. upsetting the Mexican way of life. And the other thing that I'll do is I'll actually read, right? Because a lot of it is in Spanish. So what I will do is I will actually read the parts for translation so that you don't have to be constantly reading the entire thing, and then also provide my thoughts. So sorry if it's a little bit jarring, but again, I thought this was a very interesting video, and want to capture all of it. The people are very upset, of course, for a reason. This afternoon, there was a march in Mexico City against gentrification.
What do you think about gentrification?
About what?
Gentrification.
Gentrification?
Gentrification.
Oh, I think it's important.
I find that one kind of entertaining, right? Because he's, obviously picking out someone who is there gentrifying, right? They definitely, her and the guy that she's with, definitely not born there. So yeah, just entertaining that he's picking her out and asking her, and of course. Once again, they're imposing their effing language on us, they're effing our economy, they're imposing our customs, depriving us of our customs. North Americans have arrived, our spaces and cultures are being threatened. As my friend says, chilaquiles are no longer spicy because of you. And this is where I find it kind of interesting, right? Because it's slightly different than, illegal immigration to the U.S. because it's less focused on the changing of the culture. However, this in the U.S. migration to Mexico, it is talking about that because I think people in the U.S., they get accustomed to their way of life. I mean, they lived a certain way for, 20, 30, 70 years in the case of the woman that was talking to the interviewer or that the interviewer approached. And in that scenario, right, they're going to want to bring some of their comforts with them, or they're going to want to try and I think, they shouldn't, try and change the culture to where they're going to reflect what they've, grown comfortable with for the rest of their life. And in my opinion, anytime you go somewhere like that, right, like if I were to move to Mexico, I would have the mindset of, no, I'm moving there because I love what they have, and I'm not going to try and change them. I'm going to assimilate into their culture. And that's how I think it should be, right? So I think the people who are upset about that component of it are 100% correct, right? They don't want their culture changed, and they shouldn't have to have their culture change. If you're choosing to go somewhere, you're doing it because you like the way that place is. You shouldn't just be doing it because it's cheaper. And so there's two components of it. One is the culture component, which is being talked about here. And then the other one is the affordability, which they'll get into later. And that's where I have, again, able to draw some parallels. And I find it slightly more entertaining. So calling them expats, expatriated, yes, that's what I think it is. Yeah, they don't call themselves immigrants because immigrants are dark-skinned. They're Mexican. They're from Latin America, but never themselves because they're white. They're nice, they're fancy. So, I mean, I guess it could be seen as an expat, right? It just seems like an interesting term to use. And the delineation, though, I mean, I guess the perceived delineation is kind of like they're trying to say that us as Americans look down on them, which I don't think is the actual case, because in my opinion, it just seems kind of rude to assume that, all Americans look down on, or like that, the people who are coming into Mexico look down on them. And I kind of doubt all of them do, right? And I think it's a very fine line between expatriate and versus immigration, right? Because I think there are a lot of similarities between the two. But the way that she phrases it, stating that, oh yeah, they don't want to call it because only dark-skinned people can be immigrants. I just don't think that's a very fair way to look at it. And I guess the thing that I would say is the drawn line there, what the delineation is between the two, would be more that immigrants, when they're coming to the U.S., they're looking for a better way of life and for opportunity, right? And I think that's where I would draw the delineation versus an expatriate. They're going to Mexico because, in this instance, right, it could be going to anywhere else because, they just want to go somewhere else and they want to escape their lifestyle. It's not really for an opportunity in Mexico, right? They're not going there and they're not getting Mexican jobs. They're keeping their U.S. jobs and they're just going to somewhere that's more affordable. And that's kind of, I think, the big difference between immigrants and expats, I guess is what they're calling themselves, right? I don't think that it's based on skin color. And again, I find that kind of a pedantic argument. Like, I don't think it really kind of gets to what the problem is that is being addressed in this video. You look like you're from Los Angeles. You're from where? Mexico. Okay. She's from New York. So that's what I was saying before about, yeah, she doesn't really look like she's from Mexico. So hit the nail on the head on that one. So, you know, a lot of the things that I think she says are probably, she's trying to identify as Mexican, which I kind of get, right? Because you speak Spanish, but at the same time, you came into Mexico and you are going to be viewed as part of the problem based on their complaints. At least one of the two, right? Because who knows, I don't know how she acts regularly, but she basically, you know, she could, because I know people who are white that fully embrace Mexican culture, and they're more Mexican than some of acting anyway, than some of the actual Mexicans that I know. But then the other part of the issue is, well, you're still coming there and driving prices up because of a supply and demand basically problem, right? The more people that are going there and requiring, you know, creating the demand, an increase in demand, and the supply is staying the same, well, then prices are going to go up. Do you think that you are part of the gentrification problem? That I'm part of the problem? Why? I'm just asking if you think you're part of the problem. No, I live here permanently. I have a tiny little homestead, and I started learning Spanish many years ago. So, and that is, again, I would still say that she's part of the problem. I would be interested how many years ago it was, right? Was it before COVID happened, right, and the lockdowns? Was it before that, right? If it was, then I would probably give her a little bit more leeway. But if it's after that, then yeah, 100%. You could still be there a couple of years, right? It's 5 years now. So if you've been down there less than 5 years, you're still adding to the problem that these people are experiencing, and you're adding to the anti-immigrant sentiments. And then the other thing that I think is very interesting about just the coverage of it is if you look at this right here, this screen of it, not actually that many people. I would have thought that there would be more people present, especially with the amount of displacement that's going on, the amount of people who have went down there. But you know, the coverage on this, it kind of is eyebrow raising when you're looking at this crowd, and it's not even like it's maybe what 100 people, maybe there. Doesn't really seem like it's that big of a concern. I mean, I'm sure it is, right? I totally think it is, but not a lot of people out there protesting. Yo, here for Channel 5. We're here live and direct. We're at the park in Mexico where the protest is taking place against gentrification. Mexicans are upset about rising house prices, rents, and the preference of foreigners. And that's what I'm saying. I think the first part of that is 100% yes, I get it, right? They have a valid complaint there. Housing prices and rents going up, and that's where I draw the parallel between the illegal immigration into the U.S. and the, I guess, expatriation of the people fleeing to Mexico or going to Mexico, you know, working remote, that kind of a thing. And that's where I want to draw the parallels, because the preference of foreigners, yes, absolutely. You don't want people coming in and, you know, changing the stores and all these types of things, right, that have been around forever, and the cultural identity of the people that they're moving into. I think that's absolutely awful. These people and, you know, the places that they exist in have been around for centuries and are very unique, and I think that those need to be maintained. If you're going to a place, again, you need to be absorbed into that culture. You don't try to change it to better suit what you are comfortable with. Let's see what people think. Let's see what they're saying. Let's see what they're protesting and what the solution. Let's see what happens today. We have to make this country ours again. Get out, gringos. There's a big difference between a person from South America, a migrant, a person from Haiti who has come due to their terrible conditions in their country, and a person who has the purchasing power to buy 4 houses in Mexico City, rent them, and go live in Casamlan. And that's the part that I kind of have a problem with, right, is the, going down there, and why I think it's funny in the parallels, is going down there and you can buy up a ton of different properties because it's so much cheaper. It's literally taking a page out of like BlackRock or Vanguard or any of those private equity companies here in the US, where you're basically saying, well, I got priced out of the US, so what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go somewhere else nearby that is basically an economically deflated, right? The currency is deflated versus the US, which is vastly inflated. And I'm going to go down there and I'm going to basically do the same thing to those people, the people who live there, right? So here in the US, it's happened a lot. I think it's a two-pronged problem, right? Yes, there's the illegal immigration, which is coming in and, increasing demand for things, right? And then the bigger problem, in my opinion, is, the private equity that's coming in and buying up single-family houses and flipping them, turning them into Airbnbs or turning them into rentals. And that is a massive problem. And I think what a lot of people who are less scrupulous and are more willing to copy that model are doing is they go, aha, I'm going to go down to Mexico City, I'm going to buy up a bunch of properties, I'm going to rent them out, and then I'm literally going to do the same thing in Mexico that private equity is doing in the United States. Literally just copy it, which, hey, props to them, right? They're literally just copying the model. But I think it is awful for Mexico. But at the same time, you have to say two things are true, that illegal immigration coming here is also increasing prices. So it's increasing prices in both places, although for different reasons, right? One is private equity greed and just, a vast influx, like 10 million people, where are they staying? It's not all with family members and friends. So that argument, I think, is just patently incorrect. And then the problem in Mexico is, all right, well, now you're allowing these Americans to come in who can't see a better way for themselves in America, so now they're fleeing to Mexico, and then they're just copy-pasting the private equity model into Mexico and completely destroying their city, which I think is awful. But again, in both instances, migrants from the other are helping drive up prices.
A retiree comes to Mexico to spend less than what they would in the United States.
Susan Cura never dreamed she would live in Mexico.
And that's the thing with this. I completely get it in this instance, right? I feel it's kind of, I'm of two minds, right? If you're going just because you're going, right, because you can't afford to live in America, I completely get it. I feel awful for these people that the U.S. is so bad that staying a retiree in the U.S. is no longer an option. So you have to go someplace where the price is deflated, and that's where you have to live out the rest of your days, right? I don't think that should be something that is, it's not even an option of, it's not an option. It's something that has to be done because you just can't, you can't afford the spiraling inflation in the U.S., which is awful, and I feel bad for these people. But at the same time, again, two things can be true, right? You can feel bad that that's the situation and that the greed in the U.S. has led to, basically senior citizens in the U.S. having to go somewhere else to be able to afford to live. But then also at the same time, and again, you don't know her situation, but I'm sure there's some subset of those people who are doing this that are demanding or, changing the culture with their preferences, that, again, you need to assimilate into that culture in that situation. As long as she's not going there and buying up, 4 different places or, multiple properties and renting them out for a higher price, and as long as that's not happening, okay, great. Like, I have no problem with them doing that, and I feel bad. But then at the same time, and that's the problem, is it's a very complex situation. At the same time, she still is increasing demand, right? So she still is going to drive up prices. Again, I feel bad for her, but the whole situation is just kind of a mess, and it's very sad. We have a very serious housing crisis in the city and throughout the country. Young people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s are not going to be able to buy a house. However, there is one person who came in as an expat to buy several homes, live off them, and live like a parasite because that's what they are. They are parasites that come in, take, and give absolutely nothing back to Mexico, just to live and enjoy the culture. What is necessary? What measures do we have to take as a community and as a governing system? First, there needs to be a regulation of Airbnb, the short-term rental system. And that, I 100% agree with. That should happen in the U.S. as well. There is no reason that people should be able to go buy when we're having housing shortages and we're seeing prices drive up. Because like I bought my house and the price of it within 5 years of when I bought it literally shot up over 100%. So it is insane. And it's not just one thing, right? There's illegal immigration, there's private equity going out and snatching up single family homes. And that's what the biggest issue is to me, is that when you're having these prices that are going, basically these companies that can go in, and this was happening a lot, where they would just go in with cash offers and beat out anyone who is trying to purchase homes. And so when that's happening, and then it's getting flipped into Airbnbs and short-term rental, there's already existing hotels that meet the needs of people who are trying to purchase Airbnbs. And the thing about that is, like, if there need to be more hotels, then purchase more, build more hotels. I don't know what to tell you about that. Like, there should not be a need for this many Airbnbs. And I think the big problem, and it's kind of shows how our culture is so messed up, right? Where there's such a disparity, where everything is essentially catering to a class of people who are able to afford, because there's such a gap, a disparity. They're able to afford and go out and say, hey, I'm going on vacation, and it's literally trying to draw those people and cater to those people, or people from abroad, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to the Airbnb, I'm traveling with my family, I can afford to have all my family travel, and that's literally what you're targeting, because that, to them, staying in an Airbnb is more convenient than going in a hotel and having different rooms and then, having to get together and that kind of a thing. So, like, I understand the model of the Airbnb, but hey, maybe just build hotels that have that same model, where there's like larger communal spaces, and, that's how you're basically building the hotel, instead of like single room, single room, single room. The fact that people are literally, or private equity, are literally going in and snatching up single family homes and driving up the prices of housing makes it unobtainable. And the same thing is happening here in Mexico. And it's awful, right? And that's what they're talking about here, where they're showing a map of, okay, here's all the listings for Airbnb, and here's the increase. And like, it's a wild increase. And the same thing is happening in the US. The difference is it's just, people who are able to afford it versus private equity. Same thing. Only private equity is able to do that here in the US versus there. And that's the same thing too. I mean, it's very readily available, where you will hear stories of, yes, private equity comes in and then they pay someone to basically run 6 different Airbnbs. So when you're calling the owner of the property, well, that's not really the owner. The owner is the private equity, and that's just the person managing it. And when you see that, it's really dystopian, right? Because you're essentially pricing people out of the market. And the same thing is happening there as the same thing is happening here. And that's the correlation that I see between the two. And then obviously migrants driving up prices in the US as well. And then same thing, like the older lady, where she's saying she went there because, she retired there. Same thing there, right? That's where I draw the parallel, is there's, the expats, I guess, if you will, U.S. citizens who are retiring there because they can't afford it here, and immigrants seeking opportunity. It's the same amount of demand increase on both fronts. And if you can't see that, you're just being disingenuous. Do you see what's going on with the laws, the legislation, the Airbnbs? With all of those things, we have to try and mitigate all of those problems. I love it. Thank you very much. She's talking about our sign. Have a nice day. You too. Bye. The rents are $1,000 to $1,500 USD a month, while the average Mexican doesn't earn that much. The entire city, I don't think I'm the only one here who's been displaced from their neighborhood or home, because the rent and the prices in this area have gone up because of these sons of bitches who don't care. And I feel, again, that this person and his situation, I feel for. I feel very bad for him, right? Because that's the issue, right? And I think, again, I decry it when it happens in the United States. I decry it when it happens in Mexico. And that's part of the issue is, if you don't think that allowing private equity to go out and do this in the U.S., if there isn't going to be some subset of people who are getting screwed over here in the U.S. and they go, that's a very interesting thing that they're doing. I see what they're doing. Now I'm going to go do that too. If there is a situation where there is a financially depressed neighbor, right? In this case, Mexico, where things are significantly cheaper. Well, then why don't I just go there and do the exact same thing, right? And now I can go live it up there the same way that these companies are, and the people who work there are living it up here and making the life worse for everyone in the U.S. Well, if you're an unscrupulous party, you can go do the exact same thing in Mexico. And that's exactly what's happening here. So again, allowing it to happen in the U.S., of course, someone's going to do the exact same thing in the next door neighboring country. So, and there's a reason why it's not happening in Canada, because that couldn't happen, because the prices are, essentially the same as in the US versus in Mexico. There's a huge price disparity. Go back to your fucking homes.
What you're currently watching is a video filmed in Mexico City on the 4th of July, wherein hundreds of locals gathered to protest the American-led gentrification of prominent central neighborhoods like Roma Norte, Roma Sur, and Condesa, which have seen over a 45.3% rent increase over the past 5 years.
Additionally, over 50% of respondents in a recent survey reported facing problems paying their rent or mortgage in the city.
So we're going to establishments and spaces that are utilized by people from the United States. Basically, because they are the only people who possess the purchasing power to have those spaces. And again, this is where I think it's not good what we're doing there. So,
in the wake of these protests, they were called ironic by mostly conservative commentators in the US, who feel that Mexico's critique of our so-called inhumane border policy toward their migrants was clearly at stark odds with how they act when Americans show up.
So wait, these agitators are sick of...
And this is where I agree with the general point, right, of calling the parallels. And this is kind of why, originally I did want to cover the video anyway, because I think it's interesting that they're complaining, right? But then slamming them that, they call the treatment of migrants inhumane, but then they want people to get out. This is just an overgeneralization, right? On both sides. Because the thing is, the point that they're making that, I extremely highly doubt that the people who are protesting gringos or Americans coming in are the same people who are stating, you need to allow us to come into the U.S. Because the thing is that Mexico City, right, is so far away from the border that these are not the same people that are trying to come into the US. These are people who are just living their lives in Mexico. They're enjoying themselves. They're just living their life, right? They're enjoying the Mexican way of life. They're in their own culture. They're doing their own thing. They're not harming anyone. And I think a lot of those narratives in the US are actually just Democrats or people who have come here and, they're third generation, right? They're so far removed that they think that they identify, and if you were to actually send them back to Mexico, where their ancestors came from, which I'm not saying you should, right? But if you're going to decry it so much and you think it's so great, and, why are we enforcing border security. Just go there then. Like those are the people who are decrying how we're treating the immigrants. I think even the immigrants themselves understand that, hey, I'm taking a shot for an opportunity to, send money back to my family in wherever I came from. And hey, if you don't want me here, I get it. But they're not the ones who are crying, oh, it's so awful. It's literally liberals who have no actual understanding of, the game that's being played, and that they're essentially being pitted against people who are trying to strive for economic opportunity and who are saying it's unfair for these people to come in and depress wages. And that's what my argument is, right? Is when they come in and they're depressing wages and they're driving up housing costs, not as much as private equity, right? I'm going to say that, but it's still happening. It has to be. Like, it just doesn't make sense that you can bring in 10 million people and not have an increase in demand somewhere. And so, again, the issue that I have with it is that both sides are wrong in this, right? To say that there's absolutely no parallel between these two, which is what Andrew Callaghan is saying with Channel 5, I think is completely incorrect. There is some parallel of an increased demand, but the right-leaning people saying, hey, it's exactly the same and it's hypocritical. Again, the people who are having these protests are not the same people who are also decrying how we in the United States are treating immigrants. And not even we, right? Because I'm not treating immigrants any sort of way. I do think they need to, I think there needs to be a reform, right, for immigration. But, and also, by the way, I think anyone who is here illegally and has come, especially in the last 4 years, needs to be shipped back. But yeah, it's again, both sides are wrong in my opinion in this situation.
Foreigners coming, taking advantage of their system and refusing to assimilate. The irony levels are off the charts.
This narrative would paint Mexicans as an entitled, protected class, incapable of taking in what they dish out. And to be fair, this would make sense if you thought this was some kind of close-the-border protest, but it's not. To clarify, the protests in Mexico City are about upper-income people, mostly from the US, arriving in droves to live like kings in a significantly poorer place. Not impoverished people from around the world risking life and limb to work.
And I think that's kind of a disingenuous framing of it as well, because the problem is you can't just label everyone as that, right? Like, I think the woman who was there and who retired and she said, this is where I'm retiring to, right? It's not that she wants to live like a king. It's that things here are so off kilter. It's so awful that they're allowing companies to essentially just cash in because we have no recourse, right? So again, saying everyone is going down there to live like a king is an awful framing of the argument, and I think, again, is very broad, and it paints with such a broad brush that it's not addressing why some people are actually going down there. Again, I know white people who fully embrace Mexican culture and would love to go down there and live, and that's their thing and they're into it, and so to call out that, everyone going down there is doing this thing. Yes, there are a subset that are going down and doing it, and calling out that all parties that go down there are having an impact on the pricing. Yes, 100%, right? Even if you are going down there to retire because you literally cannot afford to live in the United States, well, guess what? You're still having an impact on the pricing down there. You can still probably afford more than what a typical Mexican down there can, right? So yes, you are going to have an impact on the pricing because you're increasing demand, but to label everyone as the same, I think is just, again, very disingenuous and does not address the plurality of reasons why people are going down there. And so, again, yes, the right is wrong, but the left here is incorrect as well. And trying to paint everyone as going down there with malicious intentions is just very short-sighted and, basically demeaning to the people who are going down there for other reasons, of which I think there are plenty.
work below minimum wage in a significantly richer place. But I can see how if you're just looking at the signs, it might look like it's kind of the same thing. Anyways, if you want to learn a lot about this situation, we actually produced a full documentary about it about 6 months ago, which you can find on our.
Also, the other thing too is, yes, when you are looking at the signs, there are mirrors, right, where you're essentially calling them out. But I think part of that is that you're just really upset about what's going on, which I totally get, right? And that's part of it, though, is again, two things can be true at the same time, and there can be outrage, but again, these people are so far geographically away from the border where these other things are happening. I don't even think they think about the immigration into the U.S. because they're so far removed from it, and they probably don't care about it at all. It's not something that is on their mind. So again, just really painting all these people as the same, right? No, you're talking, I'm trying to talk about this group of people who are protesting and their thoughts and feelings about it, and trying to equate these two groups, which are very different in my opinion. It's trying to paint with too broad of a brush.
Channel. But here is the short form. So back during the pandemic of 2020, when the world shut down, billion-dollar tech companies like Google, Amazon, and Twitter moved their operations to remote work to comply with COVID protocols, which meant that employees could continue to earn six-figure salaries from their bedrooms in places like San Francisco, New York, and LA. While initially it was supposed to last for a few weeks or maybe a month or two, it ended up lasting over a year. And some tech companies, especially after seeing the productivity metrics, decided to move huge fractions of their staff to full-time remote work. Data released by the U.S. Bureau of Labor showed that in many industries beyond tech, like finance and insurance, the rates of employees working remote jumped from 11 to 44% by mid-2021. And the country reopening after COVID really didn't
which makes sense, right? And I think this is kind of a two-pronged problem where, and I'm not sure the exact mechanics of it, but I'm sure they have like a PO box or something here where they can still claim residency, so that they can, have the income taxed appropriately, right? But that's kind of the issue is, right, there's loopholes that are allowed, and that allows people to abuse the system. I 100% think that, first of all, there should be some sort of, geographical fencing where you're not allowed to take your laptop and go work from somewhere else completely different outside of the United States, right? I think that is part of the issue that's driving what's happening here. But then at the same token, it shouldn't be allowed that other people are allowed to do that to us, right? I think it should be fenced out that, and this is kind of what they're saying, right, where it's people who are from somewhere else that come in, purchase up property, and drive up the prices. Same thing with us. I think unless you're a U.S. citizen, no one should be able to buy land in the United States. And I understand that, traditionally, yes, the U.S. has been viewed as like a money haven, right, or a tax haven, where you can go in and you can purchase up real estate and whatever, and it's the safest place to park your money. But again, it's the same thing, right? Literally the same thing, pretty much, is what's happening here, where people are buying up these huge properties and driving up the prices on all of them. And then, driving up the prices from the ground up as well, because there's just less supply available. And so, that's a big thing that I've always thought is, like, why are you allowing China to come in and buy up farmland, especially near military bases? Why are you allowing, Russians to come in and anywhere, right? Why are you allowing Europeans to come in and purchase up land? Like, in your country, only people who are bought in and living in it should be allowed to live and own property. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. And same thing for Mexico. Mexico should quite honestly implement the same thing. But this is one of those things where, yes, the remote work is allowing people to go down there, and it becomes problematic. I mean, why are we even talking about this to begin with?
Make a meaningful dent in this trend. This, unfortunately, turned places like Civic Center San Francisco and downtown Seattle into basically ghost towns, full of empty office buildings and decrepit businesses, whispering.
And that's the craziest thing, too, is that, yes, it did that, but then if you look at it, the prices are still sky high in the city. Like, the amount of overflow and that's the other problem with what I was just talking about, is that the demand to get into there is so huge that yes, the prices would probably be high anyway. But then these companies are coming in and purchasing out, either private equity or foreign, interests are coming in and purchasing all these residences so that they can turn them into rentals and stuff because of tourism and, or just they're trying to create a renter class to begin with, that the prices never deflate. Like, there's all these people fleeing those areas, right? But then the prices never deflate. And like, you don't think something is wrong there? Like, how can it not have an impact? How is something not wrong where there's supposedly all these people fleeing to Mexico that it's, increasing their prices, but then it's having absolutely no impact on these very highly desirable cities? That's just a question to ask as well.
Distant memories of a bygone Silicon boom. But employees were happier and the companies had decided. Zoom is the move. Microsoft Teams is the dream. Google Meet is heat. And so employees were faced with a simple question. Should I continue to live paying $2,000 a month for an overpriced studio apartment in a place that I'm not even from, which I moved to be closer to an office that doesn't exist anymore? Or should I take my inflated California paycheck that I'm continuously earning and go live large somewhere else on the cheap? I'd pick option 2 every day. And so they did, descending upon places like Austin, Nashville, Arizona, Idaho, and Montana like an army of software engineers. Now, what do landlords, merchants, business owners, developers, and just everyday hustlers do when they hear and see that a bunch of rich people are coming to town? They jack up the prices.
See, yes, but then also if they're buying the houses as well. I mean, this was happening well before. Like, for example, I had an apartment or a condo that was basically being rented out before I bought my house. And I was looking at it and I was living there and I was paying like $600 or $700 a month. And then they tore down an ambulance dispatch center right next door, and then they put up a high rise of apartments. And I looked, and the single bedrooms were $1,400. And that's when I saw the painting on the wall, right? And this was, again, before the pandemic. So this was like 8 years ago. So I'm looking at 8 years ago, this is 3 years before the pandemic, this was already a trend that was happening. And again, that's where I think it's not just the pandemic and the influx of people, because I live in one of the states that's mentioned there, right? So yes, it happened more, and that's why my housing price doubled literally, within 5 years of when I purchased it. But same thing, right? This was a trend that was happening beforehand, where there is essentially companies that were coming in and, building new apartments in this instance, or purchasing apartments, and they're looking at, okay, how can we increase the prices, because we basically have these people held hostage. And there's been, controversies that have been covered with rents where they go in and they rent fix essentially through using software, right? Because they're not allowed to collude. But if you have a price, a software that says this is the price that you should optimally set at, well, you're essentially colluding anyway. And that's the issue, is that all of these forces are essentially coalescing to screw over Americans. And this has been an issue that has been going on for well before COVID happened. Again, I saw the writing on the wall, so I got lucky that I locked in where I did. But it's been something where, yes, it is continuing to go up. And that's an issue there. And again, that's what's creating the issue in Mexico as well.
See what they can get away with and adjust the cost of services based upon the incomes of the transplants. But gradually, as transplants become a majority, everything becomes more expensive, which brings about...
And that's the other thing too, is because I knew a lot of people that were, looking to buy, or were buying, or were selling, or whatever during the COVID. So 100% is that it's not just the rents, it's the housing prices in general, and it's the demand. Because there were people who sold, and literally some buyer would come in from California and just get a cash offer where they sold their house and they're going somewhere else. So again, that 100% happened not just with rents, but with housing prices as well. So of course, that's where I think his framing of it, where he's saying, hey, there's no correlation between what's going on in Mexico and what happened in the US. It just falls apart completely, because that's the thing, is it's just supply. It's simple supply and demand. And you can't say that, an influx of people to these different, it happened within the US, right? And then, same thing. Just the amount of people migrating down to Mexico, it's literally the same thing on that front. And I think there are multiple factors at play, but taking that and looking at it from just an influx of people to a place, that's exactly the same thing that happened. So again, saying that there's no correlation between the two and they're not similar at all, I think is completely incorrect.
Issues such as cultural erosion and local displacement. In some cases, displacement can be prevented by implementing a mass-scale rent freeze for people below a certain income level, which Mamdani's trying to do in New York City. But most of the time, the interests of city politicians are tied in with the interests of developers.
And there's issues with, like every policy, right? There's a positive and there's positives and there's negatives to it, right? And the thing is, if you put in freezes in this instance, right, is like it's the same it's the same argument for New York, where Mamdani's trying to say that that's what he wants to do is put in rent freezes, is that it messes up the economics of it. And at a certain point, yes, the nice thing is it allows an actual community to still thrive in there, especially in places with higher costs of living. And we're running into this now, where in certain areas, especially like San Francisco, where all of the housing is so expensive, like any places that you try and go that are like, retail or coffee shops or any of these sorts of things, the prices just get ratcheted up further and further and further for the cost of living, whereas no one can really afford to live there anymore. So then either people have to travel in from further away, or it's just almost impossible to find people to work at those locations, which is just now starting to happen in like San Francisco and places like that, because just it's impossible to be able to live there and work those types of jobs. And so, that's the thing rent freezes can help out with, in my opinion. But the negative side is that, everything else. I mean, and even if you are able to live in one of those places, right, where the rent is frozen, well, everything else, the cost of living there goes up. Like, I don't know if you've ever went around the country and gotten drinks, right? If you go out to a club, if you go out to somewhere in the middle of nowhere, it's going to be dirt cheap. If you go to like Vegas or New York or, one of these places that are like heavily touristy, the drinks are like 4 times the cost, if not more. And so it's one of those things where, when you're thinking about the total cost around it, like rent freeze doesn't help with that kind of stuff. And then also it screws up with like the pricing of, additional complexes, and no one wants to build because there's disincentivization that they think, if there's a rent freeze in here, then I can't collect enough money. And so it really just is kind of there. Again, there's positives and negatives to each of these, but rent freeze, even if it was instituted, is not necessarily a fix for the issues that they're seeing.
So they do nothing, they actually sponsor and promote it, and allow outside investors to tear down their cities at the cost of the community and rebuild new infrastructure to support the interests of tourists and transplants. Which brings us to Mexico City, where they're experiencing an even more magnified version than what was faced by affordable American cities who were sacked by remote workers after COVID. They're referred to down in the city as digital nomads, and they've anchored themselves, as I mentioned, mainly in the Roma Norte area.
And I'm glad that he mentions it, because it's exactly what I was saying, where yes, it is worse in Mexico where it's happening because the cost of living is so much less. So, when people are bringing in their money, there's so much more room for it to increase. And then the surrounding communities who, same thing, they're not making as much money, right? Now it becomes more of a struggle for them because that price gap can be even greater than what's happening in the communities within the United States that experience influxes, right? Because it's still dollar to dollar, the minimum wage is the same. Yes, the people who moved from California are making significantly more, but it's not like cents versus dollars, right? That's kind of what you're talking about in Mexico, and that's why it becomes a bigger problem.
where they can be seen packing nearly every English-signed coffee shop with laptops, presumably at work.
Now it's not what it used to be. Now everything is full of people, well, from abroad. Go back to your fucking country, you sons of bitches. America is a continent, not just your country. And that's the thing that's kind of funny to me, right? Is because a lot of people that would probably sympathize with her, in fact, I would say probably most, where they're saying, oh, it's so awful that the Americans are going down there and ruining her way of life, probably also have the same feeling of, oh, we should just let all the immigrants come in here, the illegal immigrants, and, you know, it's so awful that we're sending them back. And, right, it comes from a place of empathy, right? But then people don't want to look at the other side of the equation, right? Because the mirror of that is Americans here saying we don't want the immigrants coming here and send them back down to, you know, wherever they came in from, or, you know, wherever globally, right? Because again, I think there's people who came in from China, there's, you know, Somalia, there's all sorts of, you know, people coming in from all over the world. But that's the thing is, if you're going to take their side, you know, you see, oh, there's Americans coming, you can't say, oh yeah, just leave the immigrants here, because it's Americans saying literally the exact same thing that the Mexicans are saying here. And for me, I agree with both of those. I'm saying send the immigrants back in both instances, or, you know, legislate out that they can't, especially in this Mexican version, they are not able to buy up multiple homes. Even, you know, I don't even think they should be allowed to go there. I think the U.S. should have to fix the problems here where it may be affecting people that they have to go down there in retirement. Again, just my take on that. But yeah, it's funny to me because it's kind of that cognitive dissonance that I think a ton of people have, where they're not intellectually consistent with, you know, if we're going to say immigration and driving up prices and, you know, displacing people from their houses and driving up the price of living is bad there, it's also bad here. And granted, it's not going to be as stark of a difference, but it is still happening here. And so you have to just be, in my opinion, if you want me to take, you know, your opinion seriously, you have to be ideologically consistent for each of these scenarios.
It's important to note, as we did in our first episode, that many digital nomads have a genuine respect and appreciation for Mexican society and want to be a part of it. But with their sudden, jarring arrival came the unintended consequence of massive rent hikes, a budding industry of poorly maintained, overpriced, foreign-owned Airbnbs, and of course, many of the restaurants and shops in the area changing their signage from Spanish to English. These changes...
And like that argument is wild, because the same thing can be said for southern states, right? If you have been in certain areas, they will have signage where it's English and Spanish. And if you're making the argument that a huge sudden influx, which it's like, okay, what are the numbers, right? If you're making the argument that a huge sudden influx is negatively impacting them, then you don't think that that also can have a negative impact in the United States as well. So again, just ideological consistency is what I would prefer to see here, and it's just kind of amusing to me that, again, we're not applying consistent standards across the board. But I agree with him, right? And the thing is, too, that, yeah, if you're, you know, mainlining in immigrants into a certain area in the U.S., yeah, it also could upset the culture there, and, you know, everyone has different norms, right? Wherever there's things that are acceptable in certain areas of the world, right, where it's something that we don't see as acceptable in the United States. And, you know, and vice versa, right? There's things that we think are okay that if you go down to Mexico, they're not down with. And that's the thing, is you can't bring, that's what I was saying before, where you need to assimilate, right? You can't bring what you're used to and your preferences to somewhere else and expect them to conform to you.
Have made these traditionally hip neighborhoods unaffordable for local Mexicans and led to the protests that you're seeing today. Hope you guys enjoy.
When people start to be displaced by monetary and interest issues, these bubbles begin to form. This park is one such example. Many members of the North American community gather here to speak their language, feel at home, and even disparage the place where they live. They treat this park as if it were a private beach. I mean, they come bronze themselves up like, hello, it's a park. And now they're coming to check out what's going on, but like they literally don't even try to understand what's going on here. Do you know what's going on here? No, you don't know what's going on. Do you speak English? Spanish? Only a little Spanish he speaks. Well, everything is intertwined, isn't it? Ultimately, gentrification is just another step toward conquest, and we can see it because it's already happened in other places like India and the Middle East, where they suddenly became tourist areas, and now they're being bombarded. Ultimately, it's about resources, and our country is full of them. So, I kind of think that that's a little bit misguided, and maybe it's something that I'm missing by not being on the ground there, but I don't think we are trying to take advantage of their resources. I think there are some issues with water rights, like for the Rio Grande or the Colorado River, right? When it's coming down, it's pretty much all used up by California, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. So there are some issues with that where, the water is so parsed up that by the time it gets down to Mexico, it's pretty much nothing, right? But, in the sense that I think about it, though, it's not like we're going down there and extracting oil or minerals, or I'm sure there might be some deals like that being done, but I don't think it's going in and taking advantage of them and, extracting resources like she's kind of making it sound here. We're running out of water because it's being used by companies, drawing from a single dam that supports our entire country, of which construction is not even halfway done. And so we're still here, fighting and demanding, and they ignore us. Yeah, that's kind of, of course that's an issue, right? And because of geographically where they are, that's always going to be an issue. And the problem with industry in general is that, yes, when you're building up your industry, there's going to be demands on resources that wouldn't have been there before. And, it's Mexico, at least the portion that Mexico City is in, yeah, it's going to be stressed for resources, and there's certainly a conversation to be had around that. Plus, the other thing, too, is just in general, the population of Mexico City is gigantic. And so, yes, of course, that's going to be an issue, and, just population alone, it becomes an issue. So when you're adding industry on top of that, like, you have to find things for all these people to do, and I think that's probably a lot more of a complex situation, but yeah, adding more people into that mix is obviously not going to make things easier. I live near the Azteca Stadium, and we were running out of water because they are already under construction, building something near the Azteca Stadium where they are going to build some kind of hotel for all the foreigners.
Racing against time to be ready for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, an extremely tight timeline for a project of this magnitude.
And I think that is a fair point, actually, that I think 100% should be called out. And this is one of the things that drives me the most nuts about this is I was, in the lead up to the Olympics in Brazil. This is kind of one of the points that I made is like, why are they giving the Olympics? I mean, I get it, right? Because the Olympics are a global sport and you want to award it to different places that maybe haven't had it before, right? To get to host the games because it's a huge influx of people that come in there. But the issue is when you're doing stuff like that is that then you make it incumbent upon these places to, they do awful things where it's like they essentially have slave labor that comes in and builds all these, or they, build up the infrastructure for it really fast, and then when everyone leaves, it's essentially left to decay, and it's, an arena or, whatever. Basically, it's the infrastructure that was built and the structures that were built to host the actual sports those things many times just become decrepit and abandoned and no one uses them again because it's so specialized for a certain sport. And is there any actual interest for that, 2 years down the line when the Olympics have come and gone? Probably not. Or even immediately after they leave, right, in some cases. So, yeah, some of the infrastructure might be reused again, but when you're saying, okay, it's awarded to this country and you have this long to build it, and oh, by the way, you're going to need this. It's just the timelines to build out the amount of infrastructure that's required to host these games is insane. And when you try and cram it into such a short timeline of, oh, hey, Mexico, we need you to build a stadium in 2 years, then it basically what's required to do that is a huge undertaking, and it puts undue stress on that part of the world, right? And that's assuming that there's not multiple structures that need to be built. And, construction can be very, very expensive for structures on that scale. So, yeah, the fact that FIFA World Cup is going to be there, yes, it is spread across U.S., Canada, and Mexico, but, if these structures don't already exist, that's one of the things I think that they should do, is if these structures do not already exist in the country, it cannot be awarded if you cannot demonstrate that you have the infrastructure already built to host the games. I think that would be a much healthier model. You can put into, we're going to bid for the 2030, and we're this far along, and blah, blah, whatever. That would be a much better model in my opinion, than what they're doing here, where it's awarded and then these countries have to scramble to make sure that they're prepared to host the event. Again, just my opinion, but that's how I feel about it. Gentrification is practically something that locals have basically disliked since its inception, because it's basically selling off your own country to foreigners and people who practically don't help you at all. They don't help support the economy of Mexico, and all of the tax revenue generated by working people practically goes into restoring these foreigner zones. And I agree with that, right? Because that's what I was saying before about in the US, where we're allowing all of these outside entities to come in and they bring, their foreign money, and it's even worse because it's, they're buying these highly desirable places where it is, coastline properties. You're seeing these mansions for like $23 million or whatever, or more, 50 million. You're seeing these insane residences that are being snatched up, and they're not lived in for like 90% of the year. And that's the thing that's insane to me, is like, why are we allowing people to do that here in the US? I think that guy he was making a really great example, and I 100% agree with him, because, they're just basically buying it, letting the land and, the property accumulate value, and then eventually maybe they'll sell it off if they need to. But in doing so, they are raising property prices for everyone else who lives there, and they're making it objectively worse for them. I was evicted from my building because they're going to turn it into an Airbnb. So I had to go to the fucking outskirts of the city. The streets of Mexican capital have expanded, expelling thousands of neighbors in its wake. It's part of the short stay model, such as the one managed by the Airbnb platform, that in addition to banishing its deeply rooted residents and make areas more expensive, it continues to grow without any regulation. All of the red dots that you see are Airbnbs. What you see here is Mexico Park, is Spain Park, and this is Roma Park, and this is Juarez Multifamily. As you can see, our entire area is the concentration of Airbnb services. Approximately more than 50% of the city's Airbnbs are in this area. What began as an opportunity for family business has become a monopoly for a few. In the last 2 years alone, the capital went from having 24,000 short stay spaces to 25,500 spaces between complete apartments, private rooms, and hotel rooms. And that's the issue that I have with even Airbnbs in the US, is that there are an extraordinary amount. And, you know, she had that map there, but if you were to pull up a map of Airbnb, and it doesn't show right because it doesn't have all of them listed, it's only going to show like 6 or 7 at a time, so that you don't get that overwhelming. Probably because of stuff like that, where you could pull up a map and say, oh my God, look at the amount, you know, the plots everywhere on here. It's not a good picture, right? But you can see right here, if you're looking, there's almost 1,000 homes, and this is just in like downtown Los Angeles. Like, this is a very small area, and even this area has basically 1,000 different Airbnbs here. And so, yeah, when you're looking at, okay, and that's only for, like, who knows if there's ones that aren't available for the time frame that I picked, which was just a random weekend in October. So yeah, that's the problem, is that this is pervasive, not just there, but here as well. And that's the problem, is that, again, it's kind of a monkey see, monkey do, where people are leaving here and they go, what's an easy way for me to make, you know, what's the easiest way for me to make money? Well, guess what? I'm going to, you know, copy paste the model from, you know, that you see private equity doing here, where I'm going to own a bunch of properties, and then I'm going to allow, you know, I'm basically going to rent those out as, you know, short stays, because those make the most money, and it's in a place that people want to go, and then I'm just going to collect money without having to think about it. And exactly to what the video was saying before, is that the, you know, the standards of them, they're not, you know, not good at all, and you know, people just basically abuse them, and they're not really taking care of them. And so that's the issue, is that, again, it's literally the exact same thing that's happening here in the United States, and then just, again, it's at a lower price point, so people can go out and buy up a bunch of properties and then do it there as well. So I think there need to be rules and regulations against it in Mexico, but also in the United States. There are Airbnb complexes right now near Hippodromo and Condesa that expelled people from the area by raising rent costs so much, and that made everyone leave a basically $345 US is the comparison rent. It's impossible for working class Mexicans like us. Let's just say Europeans, or anyone who can justify rent costs over 10,000 pesos or 531 USD, in turn displaces those of us who need housing and want to get ahead in Mexico. The Airbnb on this trip was very cheap. It was about 5,000 pesos, $266 a day, so it's cheap for US citizens. Yes, the fact that rents have risen in these places has had a ripple effect on everything becoming more expensive. Having a soft drink here is not the same as a soft drink over in the other area. Everything is pricey around here. And that's exactly what I was saying before about, you know, if you travel around the United States, if you go to like Iowa and get a drink at a bar, it's going to be vastly different than your experience of going to, you know, a nightclub in Las Vegas or a bar in New York, right? I've been to those places, and it can be four plus times the amount for the exact same thing. And that's why I'm saying, yes, they're experiencing it there 100%, because that's the thing, is the shops that are there and are still able to operate, what are they going to do? They're going to say, oh, okay, I have a more, you know, affluent customer that's living here and coming in. Well, if I can afford to charge more money, that's what I'm going to do. And so that's what's happening. And, you know, yes, it's again unfair to these people, and I think it's probably less likely to happen, but like I was talking about, where the people are getting so displaced that there's not enough people to work jobs there, and because Mexico City's so large, it might, you know, be contained, and, you know, it might not get completely out of control, but eventually that, if you take it to its logical conclusion, that's what happens, is that people are going to be completely priced out, and there's going to be no one to work the lower skill jobs in, retail or service or all those types. People are being stripped of their homes where they've lived their entire lives. Our food, our culture, we're being stripped of our livelihoods. So who's to blame? Is it the one who pays the rent that they are charging, or the one who is charging that price? Well, it could be many culprits. No, there is only one. There are many who blame Americans for situations of houses or apartments. But I think the problem isn't the foreigners, the problem is the government, which has imposed no laws or regulations. Most time foreigners come here and pay more, but they're not the ones at fault. That's an interesting take. I think the issue is with that is, I don't know, is like, does he own properties? Like, what is he benefiting from foreigners coming here? Like, because I would, again, I do agree that yes, the government should be taking care of this and should be fixing this issue. However, as the interviewer was asking, I do think there are multiple culprits, right? Like, we should not be, as Americans, should not go down there and basically drive up all their prices. But at the same time, if a subset of people who are doing that are forced to do that and go down there and do that because they can't afford to live in the US anymore. Because again, there's two things. Yes, there are the people who are purchasing multiple Airbnbs, but the people who are going down there just to retire are still affecting the prices down there. And that's the issue, right? So, and the problem with that secondary party is that our government, in my opinion, is failing those people. And so, yes, it's forcing them to go down there and it affects the Mexicans. But again, I think there are multiple parties to blame, but it is a very complex issue, and you can't just assign blame to one group, including just the Mexican government. But yeah, the Mexican government could put a very strong stop to that and say, you have to be an actual citizen to do certain actions. What is the actual solution that you think will work? Okay, well, look, I don't want it to sound extremist, and so they should all be pushed out, because I think that in the end it wouldn't be a solution and would be very neo-Nazi on my part. But I think we should start with regulation. These sons of bitches would be very good about asking for papers, asking for taxes, just like they do in other countries, or simply, I'm generally referring to the US, but other countries also ask us for visas, passports, and background checks. We should do the same. See, and that's the thing, though, that he's saying is that's not, like, I think he has a misinterpretation of what we do, right? Because here in the U.S., what I've been saying is we allowed foreign entities to buy land and properties in the U.S. And so when you're doing that, it's the same thing, right? And so I think he just kind of has poor understanding of how other countries also operate. But yeah, I agree with what he's saying, though. They should not allow, if you're not paying taxes there, which I would assume that the people who own properties there are paying taxes there, because I can't imagine that that rent that's being charged in Mexico goes back to the U.S. That would be very weird, how to claim income that way. So I would assume that there has to be some sort of, yes, they're legally able to be there. Again, I could be incorrect in that, but that's the thing about this, is that, it's just his argumentation is correct, but his understanding is lacking. The solution is the owners, that is, those who rent out, will be subject to a clause or something like that, giving preference to Mexicans, or a price that's normal, established, or a standardized price. No nonsense of shooting it up thousands of pesos worth. And that's not really a solution so much, because he didn't really offer anything concrete, which is totally fine, right? I get that. Yes, he's just saying he's diagnosing the problem, so that's totally fine. But yeah, it's hard to there's no real solution offered there, which is fine, right? He shouldn't need to have a solution right off the cuff like that.
Many protesters find it important to note that gringos are definitely still welcome in some capacity if they do it the right way.
Which is really funny to me, because isn't the argument that immigrants should come here, at least my argument is immigrants should come here legally, not illegally. And that's literally what we're saying right here is being said, is that if it's done illegally, it's a problem. Just like here in the US. Do you see any parallels between, I mean, again, to say that they're not the same at all is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. You're welcome here only if you respect Mexico and make it better. A Yankee who works remotely has nothing to do with the Mexican government. Look at the guy painting up there. He's making us look bad, and he probably is not even from this area. So, to the first part of his statement, yes, I agree with what he's saying there, and that's what I was originally saying. So there's him saying, yes, if you come in and you make the area better. That I agree with. That's what I'm saying. You acclimate to the culture, you can spend money there, it's, economic stimulus, but you can't buy up multiple properties. Again, you're still having an effect on the price. It's still going to go up, but bringing in American money and spending money there's an argument that there could be a net gain benefit from having, external money there and spending regularly, fueling the economy. Okay, that's totally fine. And then the second point that he's making about working remotely, yes, it doesn't have anything to do with the Mexican government, but again, how do you expect people to pay for that? That would be actually, I think, an even worse situation. And that's where I think the illegal immigration to the United States was worse, is because what it's doing is it's taking jobs and it's making it so that there's downward pressure on wage growth within the United States. Because certain companies like hotels or agriculture or landscaping or whatever, the traditionally immigrant-heavy jobs are, all of those are filled with essentially what is slave labor at some capacity, right? Unless they're doing it properly. But if they're using illegal immigrants, then that drives the prices down because they don't have to, or the wages down, because they don't have to hire people and pay them the actual wage or make their pay competitive to attract talent into that job. And that's the thing is, if someone is coming in and they have their own job in this instance, for his example, that's not the case. They're just bringing in their money to spend. So that's more of a tourist model, right? But yes, they are also living there as well. So they are driving up rent prices and housing prices. But the positive to it is at least, there's an opportunity for, you can have additional things for them to spend their money on. You could ideally open your own company for them to come in because they're going to have more discretionary income. Again, there's positives and negatives to that argument, but in this instance, I think the immigration is more beneficial than, as long as they're not buying up housing, right? If they're buying up multiple units, then it's abjectly worse, but it's better than the alternative where it's suppressing wages with illegal immigration. So that's the second point. And then going into his third point about the tagging, I mean, speculation, it's so hard to tell because he has a mask on and he's wearing all black, and the shade, you can't really tell his skin color. Most of the time, just like, any sort of riot in the US or, something that turns into a riot, most of the people who are doing the crimes. Like I think during the George Floyd riots, this was very much the case, is that people from other areas came in and were doing the actual vandalism and the damage and all that kind of stuff. So, his point here that look at the guy painting up there, he's making us look bad and he's probably not even from this area. That's true even in the United States when, riots and protests and stuff like that happen. The people, where they're congregating is not where they're actually from. And you actually have, in my opinion, you're more likely to start burning things down or, creating tagging or, vandalism or that kind of stuff because you're not invested in that community. You have no ties to it. That's not the coffee shop that you're going to every day. That's not it's not possible that your car has been destroyed. There's just a lot of things where, when it's no consequence to you, you're more likely to act in a negative fashion. I mean, the truth is that's bullshit, dude. Nothing more. They just take advantage of the opportunity to infiltrate and do things that make absolutely no impact. No impact. I bet you that guy doesn't even live here. It's possible that he's from the state of Mexico, probably outside of Mexico City, that bastard. It's the truth. I'm from Edomex. I'm from Edomex, big dog. Well, you're one of the good ones, right? If you don't jump, you're a gringo. If you don't jump, you're a gringo. The people from there, because all of them are in this area, principally came here to screw over Mexicans because they know how things are here. I don't know that I agree with that point. I mean, I don't think that, when people are going certain places, I don't think they necessarily think through the end state of all of their actions, right? I think a lot of the people who went there, I think it was, hey, look, I can go somewhere else. I can have a much lower cost of living. I don't think a good portion of the people thought, hey, we can screw them over. That wasn't their goal. It was just I can go, or in some cases need to go somewhere else because I can't afford to live in the United States. And yes, I think that is a tough reality that, again, another example of how the United States becoming worse and worse and worse is actually affecting people even outside of the United States, where it displaces residents and they're forced to go other places and then in turn affect those populations in a negative way. Well, your country is really shitty. I'm going to go and just fuck around and fuck you over. See, I don't know how you could make that argument when the people are actually moving there. Because that's the thing, is if I'm willing to uproot my entire life and actually, move to and live in another place, why would they just want to fuck around and fuck you over, right? That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think that's I don't think that's their goal. I don't think that's their intention. What we want to do with this march is make it clear that our citizens, our people, don't like people profiting from them. Our sovereignty, people profiting directly from what is our land, our home, our town, our neighborhood, our very culture. The goal is to bother the gringos in their own home. I don't know about you, but I really hate it when I'm walking somewhere downtown and I hear the gringos behind me. We need to demand things like a rent freeze first. We need to demand that vacant properties be expropriated and that furniture that has been unused for more than 6 months have to be converted into public property for the nation. We need to make all the illegal digital foreigners that exist on this fucking block either leave or pay your fucking taxes. And that's where, so a few things on that, right? First, and this is an argument I will make all day, is when you have large influxes of immigrants into your country, and you're seeing this in a lot of places, is that it will make that native population, number one, resentful, which obviously it sounds like this individual feels that way. And then B, it will make them racist against them, which again, in my take on what they are saying, that's exactly how it sounds to me, is that they are resentful and racist in the language being used, it sounds like to me, against Americans or gringos, right? And then that's the second part about the digital foreigners, right? That's exactly what I'm saying, where, yeah, if you shouldn't just be able to post up with a P.O. box and you can't go and work from Mexico. Like, that's insane to me, right? And if you are, well, then it's like, you know, on your tax form, right? If you've ever worked remotely, and I've had remote jobs since well before COVID, what they do is no matter where you're working, you have to, it's based on where you live, right? All the taxes that are taken out of your paycheck, all the, you know, all these things, all your benefits, right? So like if I get laid off and I live in, you know, Texas, well then my unemployment benefits are based on Texas. And that's the thing, is that with all the different states, those are going to be very different laws in each one of those areas. And so, because each one of them are different. And so when you're having something like this and, you know, you're going down into Mexico and you're not paying taxes into Mexico, well, that is, basically a siphon on resources that should be going into paying for streets, paying for, you know, infrastructure, paying for all these different things, right? Whatever they're using their tax dollars on. If you're going down there and working, you're using all of these services and you're not really paying into them. You might a little bit with, you know, property tax or, you know, whatever they have set up there in sales tax and all that kind of stuff, right? But you're not paying, you know, tax from your wages. And that's where, yes, it's not really fair because you're not paying the entire, you know, what you entirely owe. You're paying back to the United States, and it's just a very, you know, I think it's a very poor system for both sides. We have to make this country ours again.
Something you want to say about gentrification?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the cheaps, I think it's really insensitive of Americans or anybody who would come here and say that and then, like, while displacing locals.
Favorite tacos?
Ooh, El Pastor.
And that's where, like, obviously, man, I mean, maybe he was just visiting and, like, checking out what's going on. But, yeah, if he moved there, like, what are you talking about? It's literally what you're doing. Like, it's funny because you have that blind eye to it where, oh, yeah, I'm not doing it. Oh, no, you're actually part of the problem. And he doesn't understand that, you know, half of what's going on there is complaining about being displaced and driving up prices. And even if you're actually going there on tourism and you're booking those Airbnbs, well, guess what? You're contributing to that problem. And you're just reinforcing that, yes, Airbnb is a profitable model and you can have your own Airbnb and you can make money off of it. So, yeah, why don't you invest in a couple more? All right, but that about covers it. Let me know your thoughts. Again, I wanted to cover it just because I thought it was, even before Andrew Callaghan coming in and giving his take and his monologue in the middle, I thought it was really funny that, hey, there are some parallels here. Obviously, again, it's not one for one, right? Because it's different types of immigration going each way, right? People coming here looking for work, and then people going there looking to escape prices, you know, high prices, or, you know, being locked inside in some cases, right, but with their remote jobs. So kind of different, right? Different sides of the coin, but in my opinion, it's still the same coin. Let me know your thoughts down below. Again, I think it is a very complex picture, and certainly if someone disagrees with me, I completely understand where you're coming from. That's just my take on it, of how, yes, there were parallels and, you know, they are different, but I think a lot of the problems that are happening in the U.S. are manifesting and being recreated in Mexico and probably other areas as well. But this is, I think, a good view into another part of the world. I think we all get caught up in US news a lot, so to be able to take a look at what some of the hardships are that other places are experiencing, I think it's just, nice to be a little bit more well informed about those types of things. But if you like what you saw, feel free to drop a subscription. It really does help the channel. And if you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.